you're not always going to know that that's what your child needs until they behave in a certain way. So see behavior as an opportunity to learn, an opportunity to teach, an opportunity to understand your child. Don't always jump to that conclusion that behavior is bad. The act of the behavior might have been bad and we might need to learn how to correct that. But before you correct it, that is, before you set any goals for your child, you need to do the U part of the super framework, which is the understanding. What's going on for them? Why does that behavior make sense? What must they be thinking, feeling, and behaving? I'm Jackie Hall, and this is Beneath Behaviour, where we break down stress, reactions, and get to the heart of why we all do the things we do. We'll have real conversations, find real solutions, and have absolutely no judgment. Let's talk. Whenever a parent sees a behavior in their child that they don't like or they think needs correcting or supporting, often we want to get straight to the solution. We want to get straight to, how can I stop this behavior from happening? Or if your child's going through something particularly challenging, like, how can I get them to feel better about this situation? Or how can I help solve their problem? Because we always want to get back on that right path where we're feeling good and we're feeling positive and our children are thriving in our lives and we're raising good humans, right? So all of our parenting intentions and agendas often come from that place. So when parents come to me and they say, I'm experiencing this with my child, whether it's their child's having meltdowns or their child's having tantrums or their child's giving them back chat and you're being rude or just making poor choices, they just want that quick fix solution. And sometimes, but rarely, we can just go, oh, let's try this. And then it puts a stop to it. But often there's a lot more going on. And so this episode today is really about teaching you a framework that I created specifically for the autism community, but it's really a framework that can be used for all children, and as kind of like something you can come back to as a parent that will help you to look at what's actually going on for your child. Because when you're looking at the behavior, you're seeing that in the moment behavior. And yes, we want some strategies for that sometimes. But most of the time, the work that you'll need to do to correct that or change that or teach your child a different way is going to come out of context. And you hear me say that a lot, that out of context reference. And what that means is that you're not going to be dealing with that problem in the moment. It's everything that you do outside of the moment. So I want to introduce you to the framework that we call SUPER. And SUPER stands for, it's an acronym for S being self-awareness, U being understanding, P being prepare, plan, teach, E being environment and culture, and R being relationships. Now, most of the time when we are trying to resolve a challenging behavior or just a challenge that your child's going through, we would jump straight to the prepare, plan, teach, that we want to teach them a lesson. We want to teach them how to overcome this issue or stop this behavior that you're trying to stop. But what we've got to do is first start with yourself. This is where the self-awareness comes in. Self-awareness is about, what are you bringing to the table in this relationship? What are you doing that's working? What are you doing that's not working that you need to change? How are you thinking? How are you feeling? How are you behaving in response to your child's behavior? Now, in this podcast, we have been talking quite extensively about the stressful thinking lenses. If you're not familiar with those and this is your first episode, I do recommend that you watch episode 2. You can also watch episode 3 and 4 because I referenced them quite a bit in those 3 podcasts. And so when we're talking about this self-awareness element, we need to be looking at, what must I be thinking to be feeling the way that I am in relation to this issue that I have with my child, or to be reacting, because sometimes your reactions could be unintentionally triggering your child further, or it could be stopping you from understanding what's going on for them. It can be stopping you from getting vital information that you need to be able to help them through that situation. So self-awareness is about going, okay, so when we think about those four lenses, right versus wrong, missing out, could have, should have, worth less, and I'm not going to explain them again because they are in other episodes, and those who are following my episodes are probably going to get sick of me going over and over and over them, and they'll know what I mean when I'm talking about those stressful thinking lenses. So when we look at lens one, this right versus wrong, we always have this kind of picture of a right path, and we're trying to make life go to this right path and prevent anything from going wrong. So often when we see our child doing something that we perceive as being wrong, particularly if it's socially immoral or, doesn't have what we consider to be the right social etiquette, we want to jump in and correct that and make sure they're doing the right thing again. And so sometimes our attachment to this thing being right, or this behavior, this right behavior, can cause us to panic or can cause us to get reactive because we think they're not supposed to be behaving that way. They're supposed to be behaving better than that. So sometimes we've got to look at our own kind of perceptions of what is actually triggering me about this situation. Because when we're talking about these stressful thinking lenses, we're always looking at it in reference that our emotional stress is a conflict between belief and reality. So the reality might be that your child is behaving the way that they are, but the conflict you're having is this whole narrative about how they shouldn't be doing it, what it means about you that they are behaving that way, what they should be doing instead, what it means about your life, what it means about their life. Like, you're rolling around in those four stressful thinking lenses, thinking it's wrong, missing out, could have, should have, worth less, personalizing that behavior in some way, because when you feel triggered by your child's behavior, it's not because of the child, it's not because of the event. Because as we established in the first episode, if it was the event that triggered you, then that would mean that you would be triggered every single time you face that event. And we know that sometimes we're super chill when it comes to, our child having a tantrum or giving us back chat. We can handle it quite well. And then other times we're quite triggered. So it's not the event that's doing that. It's the narrative that you have about that event. And so when we're looking at our child's behavior, we're needing to get a sense of what it is in my narrative that's actually triggering me about that behavior, because their behavior is coming from their beliefs, where they're at in their child development, and how they've kind of perceived that situation in that moment. But your reaction to their behavior is coming from your beliefs. And so if you want to respond to this situation in a way that is productive, caring, emotive, but also setting some boundaries and helping them learn how to interact with the world in a way that's going to get them what they're wanting, and creating great relationships, you want to come at it in that calm way. So you have to be self-aware, which is that first step. What am I thinking? Am I triggered by this? And if I am triggered by this, what is that narrative saying? Am I in conflict with reality? Am I expecting that they should already be at the place where they're behaving in the way that I think that they are? And from that place, because they're not, you're in conflict with reality. You have that narrative that they're wrong, they're doing the wrong thing. And a lot of the time we think that their behavior is doing this to me. So we're personalizing it. We're thinking that they are deliberately behaving in this way in order to make me feel a certain way, or ruin my life or interrupt my life. And so we can have this whole story running in our head that we have to kind of take care of. And sometimes you're not going to be able to do that in the moment because you're already triggered by it. You've already reacted. There's already this interaction between the two of you, and you've got to wait for it to kind of die down before you can kind of come back, back to your separate corners, deal with what was going on for you inside. And in episode 5, we talk about how you can upgrade those lenses as well. So that will be a good one to go back and listen to. So when you're kind of aware of your own narrative and your own expectations and your own pictures of how you think things are supposed to be, and by the way, just to kind of elaborate on that a little bit more, it isn't just about your picture or your idea of a right path being their right behavior. Also, your belief systems can come into play that can affect how you respond to certain things. For example, you can get attached to the indoctrinated way we think schooling is supposed to happen, that they have to go to school every single day, that, and ideally we might want them to go to school every single day. But if your child, particularly if your child's autistic, is having challenges at school, and you're attached to, I've got to get them there, I've got to get them there, otherwise I'm going to look like a bad parent, it's going to be hard for you to get out of that story and get into the world of them, to get a sense of what must they be thinking to be feeling the way that they are. So there's a whole narrative in terms of our belief systems about life, about school, about values, about right behaviors versus wrong behaviors. You're going to bring into your narrative things that you experienced when you were growing up that you don't want your child to experience, or things that you didn't get when you were a child that you do want your child to have, that you're going to get attached to that story being their pathway as well. So some examples of that is sometimes parents can have experienced bullying in their childhoods, and so they want to overprotect their child. They want to do whatever it takes to prevent their child from experiencing that. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. So the picture itself is never the problem. It's the self-worth attachment to it. It's how we're perceiving things when we're not there already, or we haven't been able to get our goal. That's when that narrative starts to kick in. So if you're seeing your child experience something that is coming from your missing out lens as a child, or coming from, some kind of attachment you have to getting a right life or a right pathway for your child, you're going to have all sorts of responses to that behavior that isn't even about the child, it's about you, because your narrative is saying, I should be able to get this experience right for my child. And if I can't, they're going to miss out, and it's all going to be my fault, and I'm going to be a terrible parent. So again, we have to be aware, and this is why I focus so much on those lenses to begin with, because even in all of our programs, and particularly in our autism program, we focus on the first 2 weeks. The first 2 weeks of the program focuses on you and your mindset, and how you can understand those different pictures that you have and these expectations that you have that just may not relate to your autistic child, or in neurotypical children even. So we have to be self-aware of, what must I be thinking? What are my perceptions? What are my beliefs about this that may be triggering me, or maybe influencing how I'm behaving in response to what I'm seeing in my child's behavior? And then that self-awareness is not just about, what am I thinking? It's also about, how am I behaving? Is there anything that I'm doing that is unfair, unreasonable? This is where you've got to really be honest with yourself and going, what am I bringing to the table here? Am I expecting my child to be calm and rational and speak to me nicely, but I'm swearing at them, I'm yelling at them, I'm being rude, I'm being disrespectful, I'm being dismissive, I'm being critical, judgmental, disapproving? So we've got to kind of check our own behavior and go, am I being the example that I want to see in my child? Am I giving them the love and respect that I expect them to be giving me as well? Because it is a two-way street here. And I know that many of us were raised in that old school way of parenting, where children are seen and not heard, they don't have an opinion, they don't get valued as having their own voice. But the kids these days are not having that. They've grown, they've come into this world that says you have rights, are allowed to have an opinion, you should be treated with respect. And so sometimes we have to check our own behaviors and go, am I contributing in some way to this dynamic between my child and me? And sometimes that's not just about, your behavior in terms of your attitude towards your child. Sometimes it can come from how I'm feeling in terms of, am I anxious around my child? Am I feeling fearful about my child? Am I feeling stressed out about life? And that's coming through how I respond to my child. And now these aren't always easy answers to get to the other side of this. If you've been watching my podcast and looking at the lenses in week 2 and the upgrades in week 5, it takes a lot of work to change how we perceive things. And some of our perceptions run quite deep. And I talk about that in episode 3, actually, when we talk about anger and guilt and fears and how those lenses play into some of those common emotions. And then in episode 7, I think it is, we talk about depression and how those lenses really kind of filter into that depressive state of being. So we've been talking quite a lot about how these lenses can sometimes have quite deep roots. And so it might take some time, and you might even need to work with a psychology professional to help you to kind of work through those belief systems. But even just being aware that your narrative is triggering your emotions and your behaviors, and changing and just kind of changing whatever you can in that moment can make such a massive difference to jump out of the world of you and jump into the world of your child, so we can get to understanding what's going on for them, which is the next part of the super framework. But before we get there, there's kind of one more element. So particularly if you're working with neurodiverse children, they are very often super sensitive to how you're feeling. They can feel a lot more of people's energies. And so sometimes it can even be that you're needing regulation tools, emotional regulation tools, to regulate your nervous system so that their nervous system can be co-regulated to be able to hear what you're saying, or to, come down from what's going on for them as well. So the self-awareness element is about, what am I thinking? What am I feeling? How am I behaving? We need to be looking at all 3 of those to understand how I may be contributing to the problem, but also looking at how you think, feel, and act on how you're contributing to the solution. Because very often when we're looking at a problem, we're only seeing the problem. We're only seeing what we don't want, how it's going wrong, what's not working. And we'll always find evidence of what we have our attention on. So if you keep looking through those lenses and keep looking for evidence of what's wrong, what you're missing out on, what's not working, that's all you're going to find. So we have to sometimes deliberately go, what am I doing that is working? What seems to change my child's behavior? Like if I'm getting a positive response from my child, if things went better than they normally do, and I find myself going, I don't know why they just listen to me in that moment when all the other times they don't listen to me. What did you do differently? Sometimes there can be clues in that. Sometimes there can be clues in the other parent that may be getting a better result, or a teacher or some other person maybe have a better rapport with your child. And you want to be able to have that self-awareness to look at that and go, what are they doing? Is there anything that they're doing that I could also be bringing into the relationship with my child as well? So it's looking for what isn't working, but it's also looking at what is working, so that we can bring that into the equation when you're deciding on what you're going to do to help your child through this challenging behavior or this challenging time of their life. So that's the self-awareness element. Once you're able to kind of have that self-awareness, we jump out of the world of you, jump into the world of your child, and go, what must they be thinking to be feeling the way that they are, to be thinking the way that they are? Where are they at in their brain development? Now, very often we have these expectations, and sometimes we can, kind of mistakenly think that as soon as a child starts talking, they have the ability to use logic and reasoning skills. But some people don't know that those logic and reasoning skills don't really come online till around 6 or 7 years of age. So a lot of the time you're going to see that hit and miss in terms of their ability to think about cause and effect, to listen to your reasoning and logic, because a lot of the time they're just a clean slate trying to figure out the world, how it works, what happens when I do X. Will it lead to Y? And if I do X again, will it lead to Y again? A lot of the time they're just sort of playing around with life and figuring it out. And we're very much in an educational stage where we're teaching them. And so we know that, there is diversity amongst brains, and we need to look at your specific child and go, where are they at in their brain development? Where are they at in their capability to understand this situation, understand what's going on around them, for them to even know that the way that they're responding is inappropriate for starters, or even just to know how to deal with the situation? Because a lot of the times you're seeing this behavior because they just don't know what else to do, or because their nervous system is so dysregulated that they've gone into a panic about how they're feeling. So it's no longer even about the moment that caused them to feel the way that they did in the first place. It's now about my reaction to my reaction. That I'm reacting to my emotional response about the situation. So we need to be highly attuned to our child to be able to go, why does this behavior make sense? What are they thinking behind this behavior? Why does it make sense that they chose to do that? And sometimes they do know right from wrong in terms of morals and values and social etiquette, but they've done something different anyway. Why is that? Because sometimes you can have proactive behavior, which is very deliberate. The child is proactively deciding, I'm going to behave in this way in order to get what I want or to avoid what I don't want. But even then, because sometimes when we see our child throwing a tantrum or behaving rudely in order to get what they want, we still need to be asking that question. What's going on for them? Why do they feel the need to behave in that way to get what they're wanting? Do they know how to behave differently? Do they have different language, a different way to respond? Are they responding that way because it's been modeled to them in some way to respond that way? Is that part of your relationship dynamics that maybe you help to set up? This is where that self-awareness has to kind of blend in to understand why the child is doing what they're doing. Because it can come from them doing it because they're not at the place that you want them to be in their brain development. They're at a different stage. They haven't learnt that lesson yet. It can be that they're doing it because they think that's the only way to get what they want, and they haven't yet been taught that there are other ways to discuss this and behave in these ways. Or it can be because of the relationship dynamic that we behave the way that, like, often hurt people hurt people. So if they're hurting behind that, sometimes that can come out in anger. Sometimes it can come out in, defiant behaviors. If your child's feeling disapproved of quite consistently, or criticized or judged, or they don't feel good enough around you, or they feel like your expectations are so high they'll never meet them, so why bother? There's so many things that can be going on for your child. And what we have to recognize is that your child can be doing those stressful thinking lenses as well. They can be having expectations of themselves, or they can have pictures that they're attached to of this right path versus, a wrong path. And they're trying to prevent life from going to plan. And they're trying to make life go to plan and prevent it from going wrong in their eyes. They can be stuck in their missing out lens, where they're only looking at evidence of what they have their attention on, and what they're missing out on, and the lack in their life. And they can be missing, just like you do, is when they're looking for what's wrong and what they're missing out on, they're not looking at what's right, and they're not looking for opportunity in the unwanted. They're not looking for what they've learnt in those unwanted situations. They can be very much stuck in, it has to be the right path or not at all. So everything that's going on for you in terms of how you think, feel, and behave can be going on for your child as well. And that's why it's also really powerful to work on yourself and work on your own narrative and lenses and upgrades. Because when you understand yourself, it's a lot easier to jump in the world of somebody else and make sense of their behavior, because we all think the same. It's all just in different packaging. We all think through those four lenses: wrong path, missing out, could have, should have, worth less. And we all need help sometimes to move into those more upgraded, reality-based ways of looking at life. So we're needing to understand, what is my child thinking? So what's that narrative that they're playing out that causes them to feel the way that they do and behave the way that they do? And let's understand that behavior. What was that behavior trying to get them? What are they trying to achieve from that behavior? Or what are they trying to avoid by behaving in that way? And how can we help them in to be able to behave in a different way or respond emotionally in a different way? Because sometimes the behavior that you're seeing isn't coming from that proactive place, it's coming from a reactive place. And so when we're coming from a reactive place, we've had this emotional flooding to the point that when you get really emotional, your body's gone into this kind of stress survival mode. The blood actually stops or is compromised in getting to the logic reasoning parts of the brain. So the rational part of the brain actually goes offline. So sometimes this can happen when you see your child have a meltdown. This is when they've become emotionally overloaded and they can't think straight. So we're needing to help them in that moment to regulate their emotions, to figure out how we can just help them work with the body. We're not trying to give them logic. We're not trying to give them reasoning. We're not trying to tell them what to do. We're definitely not trying to tell them what they've done wrong. We're just trying to work with the body in that moment to help them to come back to a baseline state of feeling, whatever that is for your child. And so many parents, when they see that kind of behavior, they get into a conflict cycle with their child where the child behaves in a certain way, the parent reacts in a certain way, and then the parent behaves in a certain way. And then the child is reacting to how the parent is behaving, and then the parent's reacting to how the child's behaving, and they just get stuck in this constant conflict loop. And they don't realize that in that moment when that child is so dysregulated that they can't think straight, they can't listen to you, they can't even hear you, let alone listen to your reasoning and see the logic in what you're saying. You can do that later. Do that later when we're back to baseline and we reflect on that situation. But in that moment when they're dysregulated, they can't hear you. So we need to help just work on the calming down. And that might be for some kids that it's about giving them their space. It can be that some kids need you beside them, but not necessarily touching them. Some kids actually do need that touch for soothing, with very minimal. And we will kind of bring this up in another episode about, difference between tantrums and meltdowns and what we can do about them. But this understanding element of the super framework is just about what's going on for my child. I really want to make sense, because behavior is communication, and there will be a logical reason why your child's behaving the way that they are. So when we're looking at it from an autistic perspective, we have to also take into consideration the autism brain and the spectrum of things that can be going on for your child. For example, executive functioning skills. So your executive functioning part of the brain is responsible for planning and organizing and looking at and transitioning and emotional regulation. So all of those things are going to be sometimes difficult for your autistic child. So when you're telling them to get ready for school in the morning, sometimes, and they're not doing that, you go and say, hey, put your shoes on and brush your hair and clean your teeth, and you give them all of these instructions. They may not be able to process all of those instructions. And you might find that 5 minutes later, you go in there and they're playing with their toys, or they're, playing on their devices, and they've completely forgotten everything that you've said. So you can also have a PDA child who's full of anxiety that, every time you ask them to do something, that's considered a demand. And for those of you who don't know what PDA is, it's pathological demand avoidance. It's a profile of autism, and it stems from anxiety. So a demand can trigger an anxiety response, and the child has to shut down, because it's not that they won't do what you're saying. It's that they can't do what you're saying, because their body kind of goes, that demand feels like a threat. Even as simple as something like, how was school today? There's so much that can go into that answer that the brain can be going, well, school, what answer does she want? What answer does he want? What do they want me to say? Some parts of school was good, some parts of school was not. what aspect do they want that? Like, there's so much that can go on in their mind about what answer to give, that the demand of giving an answer, and even giving an answer on the spot, can trigger a anxiety response and a shutdown. So again, it's getting to know our child and understand what's going on in their brain. If they aren't doing what you're asking them to do, is there something going on for them that is a barrier to them being able to do what you're asking them to do? Like, for example, executive functioning or PDA, that's stopping them. Is it, even if you're talking about a neurotypical child and they're not doing what you're asking them to do, is it too complex for where they're at in their brain development? Do they just need some help to get started, to figure out how they can go about it? Don't assume, and this is what we often do, and this is again coming back to that self-awareness, don't assume that your child is deliberately trying to defy you. And even if they are, again, we need to understand, why does that behavior make sense? Why did they choose to deliberately defy you? So is it deliberate defiance, or is it a lack of knowledge, and is it a lack of skills? So sometimes what you need to do is literally diarize their behavior and start to see patterns. Everybody has, it's fascinating. It's one of my favorite things to do, is to recognize the patterns in people's behaviors, because there always is a pattern. And sometimes for parents, if it doesn't make sense and you're not able to get that language out of them to understand what's going on for them, we have to observe. You have to go into a detective mode, and sometimes diarizing the behavior to look at what happened before, what happened during, what happened after. What was their tone of voice like? What was their attitude like before, during, and after? What words were they saying? Was there any repetition in their voice, in their words that was said last week or last month or yesterday or today? Was their body language different? Was it with one particular person and not another person? Was it at a particular time of the day? So sometimes it can be helpful, particularly if you have a non-speaking child, or you have an autistic child that isn't necessarily able to express how they feel or what they're thinking. You will have to go into a deep detective mode, and you may not get that answer straight away. And that's why I was, saying that a lot of this is, out of context, what we're doing. So once we get into that understanding side of things, and we're really making sense of the child's behavior, from that place, we're then able to set goals. Because often we see the behavior and then we go, okay, I see this behavior. So here's the perfect example. I remember a parent coming to me, and she had an autistic child, and he was at kinder or prep, and he pushed another child into the playground, into the sandpit, and he got sent into the timeout room. And she said, it's just not like him to do that. And I'm not sure why he did that, but I need to teach him, that that's not okay. And the teachers, gave him a social story about keeping his hands to himself. And so I got her to do a little bit more digging, and she came out a few different ways, and her son was able to communicate with her that at that time in the playground, he was feeling really overwhelmed, like there was a lot going on, and he had seen another child push somebody and that get sent to the timeout room where they got to read books and it was really quiet. So in his mind, he thought, I'm overwhelmed. I want to go to that room because it's quiet and I want to just read books and be by myself. How do I do that? I push this child because that was the only way he knew. Now, if we just looked at that behavior, we'd think, oh my gosh, he's being so rude and nasty. He's being a bully. I need to teach him that that behavior is absolutely not acceptable. We need to give him a social story that teaches him that. But that wasn't actually the problem. The problem was he didn't know what to do when he was feeling overwhelmed in the schoolyard. Now, that doesn't mean we don't also need to tell him that what he did do wasn't okay, but we also need to teach him another way, so that now the social story can be about telling the teacher when I'm feeling overwhelmed and asking them if I can go to the other room, giving him some sort of retreat option. So you're not always going to know that that's what your child needs until they behave in a certain way. So see behavior as an opportunity to learn, an opportunity to teach, an opportunity to understand your child. Don't always jump to that conclusion that behavior is bad. The act of the behavior might have been bad and we might need to learn how to correct that. But before you correct it, that is, before you set any goals for your child, you need to do the U part of the super framework, which is the understanding. What's going on for them? Why does that behavior make sense? What must they be thinking, feeling, and behaving? What must they be thinking to be feeling the way they are, to be behaving the way that they are? Then we can jump into the prepare, plan, teach, which is typically where we default to before we've done the first two steps. And that's why a lot of behavior management strategies don't work, because you haven't actually looked at your part in it and how you're coming at it, and you haven't actually looked at the world of your child, why the behavior makes sense and what's going on for them. Once you do that and you set child-centered appropriate goals for them, then you can start to go, okay, how can I prepare? How can I plan? How can I teach? So the preparing stage of things is particularly relevant if you have an anxious child. And a lot of autistic children are very, very anxious. A lot of children in general are quite anxious. And when we look at anxiety, the lenses is right versus wrong and could have, should have. So we think I should be able to control life so it goes right and prevent things from going wrong. And if I feel out of control, I go into fear because I worry that I'm not going to be able to handle what's coming up for me. So sometimes as we're working on, so you might have multiple goals for your child. It might be, if your child's anxious, for example, we want to help them with the mindset side of things, the top-down side of things, where how they're perceiving things, why they're fearing things, and help them get an accurate view of life and reality, and help them to deal with some of those challenging situations psychologically. We might need to set goals on helping them to regulate their emotions. That's the bottom up side of things, that we're helping them with certain tools to be able to do that. So we want to be looking at it from that top down and bottom up. We might have strategies that we might be trying to put in place to just gently expose them a little bit further to the situations that they're fearful of, to gain their confidence. But we need to do that in really scaffolded ways. And so while you're putting those things in place, which is part of the plan and teach stage of things, or particularly the teach stage of things, we need to be also preparing them. Help an anxious child to know what's coming up, what it'll look like, what they can do if something challenging happens. Do they have a retreat option? Can they tell somebody when something gets a little bit beyond what they feel capable of handling? Because we're not always going to be able to predict our future. So while you're trying to give them information on how to on what's coming up and what it's going to look like, if an unexpected situation or an unexpected change comes in, you want to also give them the resources to know what to do if something difficult happens. So that's the prepare stage. The plan stage is looking at planning what's coming up and planning with them so that they feel that sense of control, that even though we're trying to help them psychologically so that they don't feel anxious about unexpected events or unpredictable events, while you're getting to that, while you're teaching them that mindset, while you're helping them to regulate their emotions and, top down, bottom up, you're also needing to give them that element of control, that element of predictability, because that's going to help them feel safe. And you're not going to be able to teach a child anything if they feel unsafe. And this goes for school as well. If your child's going into a school environment and they feel unsafe, they're not learning. So mental health and that feeling of safety and staying out of survival mode is absolutely crucial to learning anything. That's why we have to spend so much time in the understanding mode to make sense of what they're thinking, how they're perceiving things, what their narrative is, or what their narrative could be, so we can help them psychologically. We can also help them with tools, practical behavioral tools, and we can also help them from a bottom-up perspective and helping them to regulate their emotions. So we're helping how they think, helping how they feel, helping how they behave. We have to come at it from all three angles. So that prepare, plan, teach is about helping them practically in their lives from top down, bottom up, and behaviorally. And from that perspective of behaviorally teaching them what to do, we need to look at what is it they can't do, what can they do with assistance, and what can they do by themselves? Because sometimes what they can do by themselves can be leveraged to help them to do something new. You already know how to do this. This is just the next step, right? So we can scaffold it that way. Or we can go, okay, they can do this thing that I'm trying to teach them with support, with help. So I'll keep helping them and then I'll slowly back off. So you can scaffold it that way as well. We always want to make sure that if you're pushing your kids to do something new and they try something new and it's hard or they can't cope, because when we talk about trauma, trauma is that I didn't have the resources or the capacity to deal with that event. So we want to always give them a retreat option or a way to come back to that safe space if it got too hard. Then later on, we can say what worked, what didn't work, why did that happen, what can we do differently? And we go back to the drawing board and we try again. We don't have to get it right the first time. It might be that it is a gradual approach to being able to do that thing that you're teaching them. So it's about that follow-up. We have to make sure that we're following up afterwards to see what worked and what didn't when we're trying to teach them, because we can't expect that they're always going to be taught something and then they're going to be able to do it straight away. It's not so linear. So again, you have to be mindful of your own self-awareness that you're expecting them to get it right and get it right straight away. So we've spoken so far about self-awareness, understanding, prepare, plan, teach, and you can see how they're all integrated together. They're all so important because even when you're doing the prepare, plan, teach, you're constantly still needing to check in with yourself about your expectations and how you're thinking and how you're perceiving the setbacks that you might have, or the hurdles or the barriers that your child faces as you're trying to teach them something new. And throughout all of that, you're also trying to jump into the world of them and understand what's going on for them. Why didn't that work? Why does that make sense that they behave this way when we talked about them behaving that way? So you can see also as well that it's quite complex when we're talking about helping a child with certain repetitive behaviors or even just new behaviors you're seeing. We have to get that sense of what's going on for them and what you're bringing to the table and what we actually do need to prepare, plan, and teach. So let's throw some other elements into the mix, and this is where the E and the R comes in. So the E is about environment and culture. Now, typically when we're looking at a child's behavior, we're looking at what do we need to change in the child for them to change their behavior? What do we need to correct in the child? But sometimes, and this is particularly the case with autistic children or neurodivergent children, is it's the environment that needs to change. It's the culture that needs to change. It's everything around the child that needs to change. And this is also where your self-awareness needs to come in, where let's take environment, for example. Is there something in the environment that's preventing the child from behaving in the way that you're wanting them to do? For example, in a classroom, it could be too noisy. It could be that the workload isn't getting presented in a way that the child is able to process. So for autism, a lot of the times visuals is a lot better than verbal. Or watching videos, or instead of writing, that they are able to type. So there's certain provisions that can be put in place to help a child to learn in different ways that might be more conducive to how their brain actually learns. So we're needing to look at, maybe even the sensory side of things. Is it too loud? Is the teacher too quiet? Are they too, distracted by everything that's happening in the room, like lighting and sounds that we may not be able to hear, but the autistic child can hear? So the environment is about looking at what is the child experiencing in their environments that could potentially be a barrier to them achieving the goals that we're wanting for them or they're wanting for themselves. And so we have to kind of take an inventory of the possibilities that there could be something going on in their environment. And that mixes in very much with the culture as well. What is the culture of your family? Do we have a culture where we are accepting of differences? Are we accepting of mistakes that we make? Are we seeing them as opportunities to learn? Do I have a critical environment, or do I have an environment that puts each other down, where we're fighting all of the time, where we're hating on each other all the time, where, we're not supporting each other? Because all of that's going to influence your child's self-esteem and how they feel about themselves and how they respond to certain situations, because it's modeled in their environment. Sometimes we need to really kind of be, this is again the self-awareness of what sort of culture am I bringing into the family? Do I have a culture in the family where we hear each other out, where we try to understand the other person's perspective? Do we have a culture where we negotiate things when we disagree? Like, how do we handle conflict resolution? Is that something that I'm modeling in with all of the siblings, that we have high values in terms of respect and gratitude and appreciation and love, and just look up the different values there are and select which ones are relevant to my family, which ones do we want? Or have a family meeting where you sit down and go, what sort of family life do we want? Let's sit down and work out what we want our family culture to be like and work towards that, because that's going to make a massive difference about, whether your child feels safe in their home environment to be able to share with you what's going on for them, whether they are learning how to push back in a respectful way rather than backchat or giving attitude or fighting for what they're wanting because they don't feel heard. How do we bring in a culture where our child does feel heard, where they do feel respected, they're loved, liked, appreciated, valued in the family home? Same in the classroom as well. Is there a nurturing culture for the child to feel safe and liked, so that they don't have to mask, and so that they aren't kind of stacking up all of the challenges that they're having that ends up leading to an emotional meltdown because they're so dysregulated and they've, gone into a reactive response. So the environment and the culture is looking at what's happening outside of the child that can be changed. And often they're often the easiest things that can be changed, that can make such a massive difference to how the child is responding. Because yourself, if you are around somebody who feels nurturing and feels non-judgmental, here's what you say, you are much more likely to respond to that person in a respectful way, in a calmer way. You'll listen to that person more, and you'll learn from that person more, because you weren't in a defensive state or a reactive state when you were around that person. So if you can create a culture of that connection with your child and an environment that serves their sensory needs as well as their learning needs, you're going to find that that's going to make a massive difference in their behavior on its own, let alone in combination with the SUPE and R, which I'm about to get to, which is the relationship side of things. And the relationship side of things definitely ties into the S and the U, the self-awareness and the understanding, because the relationships is all about how our dynamic is, the dynamic between you and your child. Do you have the rapport with your child to be one talking to them about or guiding them about what they are doing and what they need to be doing differently? When you look at your relationship with your child, is it just about you trying to fix them, trying to change them, trying to correct them? Because coming from that self-awareness side of things, we get so attached to our picture of a right life and the right way to parent and the right way I'm supposed to correct all their behavior and get their life right, and the pressure we put on ourselves to get it right is going to influence your relationship with them. Because if you're looking for the potential wrongs that you have to correct all of the time in order for you to be that perfect parent, you're not going to look at all the time, all the things that they are doing well. You're not going to be noticing them, and you're not going to be encouraging them and letting them know that, hey, this is great. You're doing really well. And giving them that encouragement. When we're so focused on preventing things from going wrong, we're not focusing on the right stuff either, which means we're probably not having fun and being playful and having the light to the shade. That we live in a world of contrast for a reason, and where there's a good, there's a bad, where there's an up, there's an out, down, in, out. There's these polarity in everything. And so we have to make sure in your relationship with your child that it's not all about the seriousness of trying to guide them, help them, correct behavior, fix behavior, change things, give them support. Are we having fun? Are we just enjoying each other's company? Are you showing them that you're interested in them, that you can laugh with them, and that you're just hanging out sometimes, that it's not all about therapies or fixing or changing mindsets or putting things in place so that they can do more and learn more and practice more, and just give yourself and your child the grace to just enjoy life and find things that you can connect to, because that builds what I call relationship capital. And that relationship capital earns you the right to go through the difficult times with them and to have those deep and meaningful conversations, particularly if you have teenage children as well, where, it's easier when the children are younger to be playful with them sometimes. I mean, parents can still get caught up in that whole, attachment to getting it right and getting the child's pathway right, that they forget to have fun. But a lot of the time it feels like it's more fun to have, that laughter and that lightheartedness with your child when they're younger. And when they get to those teenage years, and we've got these tiny little windows in those teenage years where it opens and we're allowed in. Don't make that time all about trying to tell them what they're doing wrong and correcting them. Be playful, be silly, be a dork. They let them pay out on you. Like children, teenagers love that kind of camaraderie sort of thing. And, just like them for who they are, be interested in what they're wanting. Because if you want your children to talk to you about the big things, you have to be willing to talk to them about the little things and be playful and get engaged with them from the things that they're interested in. And having those, funny conversations and those funny reference points that they can see that your whole relationship is built on the love, the care, the fun, the laughter, the good times, and you are seen as a safe person that you can then talk to about the more challenging things, or you can work through those with them because you've earned the right. So I don't mean, when I say earn the right, I don't mean that that you don't have the right to parent them and guide them. I'm talking about the quality of your relationship and their ability to listen to you and see you as a valid person to talk to about their challenges. Have you earned that right with them through the rapport that you've built, through that relationship capital? Because I can promise you, from working in residential youth care with very complex, traumatized children, that relationship capital goes a long way when that child is dysregulated, when that child is struggling with something and wants to throw it all out at you and project that all at you, that you have that capital to be able to use your relationship in those situations to be with them, to work with them. The relationship side of things is also about your communication skills. How are you speaking through with them? Are you validating their emotions, or are you making them wrong? Are you using what we call what I've learned as emotion coaching, which is validating their emotions and helping understand what's going on for them before you even try to work with them on solutions, that they have to feel heard, they have to feel understood before we then go into those solutions. You can't just dive right in there and go, if they've said that there's a problem, and just try to fix it for them, because that's going to sometimes feel dismissive or disapproving, and you're going to have this shutdown response from them. So it's about how you're communicating with your child, and it's about how you're building that relationship capital. So That's the framework that we work from: the super, self-awareness, understanding, prepare, plan, teach, environment and culture, and relationships. And you want to be using all 5 of those and reflecting on that whenever you see your child behaving in a certain way, or you're just reflecting on how you are as a parent. You want to be kind of using that as a framework behind everything that you do to help you to navigate through those challenges with your child. So this is something that if you are a family of an autistic child, this is something that we use throughout our entire 9-week autism program. We are looking at every aspect, whether it's looking at your emotions, your mental health, whether it's looking at understanding your child's behavior, or whether it's looking at what we're teaching them, the goals that we're setting them, or their environment. Any of those things, we are bringing in that super framework so that it gets integrated into everything. And you're not just focusing on, what do I do when my child does X? Because yes, we also teach those strategies too, like when your child's having a meltdown or they're in the middle of an emotional dysregulation. We do need tools on what to do, and we do teach that as well. But the majority of what you do to work on a challenging situation or a challenging behavior in your child is going to be that super framework. And you have to come at it from all of those different angles, or at least reflect on whether any of those different aspects are contributing to that behavior so that you can do something about it. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode today, and I hope it's got you thinking about your certain situation that you might have with your child, and whether there might be some of these other super elements that you haven't yet thought about that could very well be making, or could make, a massive difference to the outcome of how your child thinks, feels, or behaves. Thanks for listening. See you on the next episode. Hey guys, thanks for watching the Beneath Behaviour podcast. Now don't forget to subscribe on your favourite podcast channel so you never have to miss an episode. And we'll see you next time.